Welcome to the AVAIL podcast, where we dig deep and talk about the art of leadership. My name is Virgil Sierra, and today we're sitting down with Pastor Johnny Moore. Johnny is the lead pastor of Family Worship Center in Cairo, Georgia. In this episode, we'll discuss his new book, Homegrown, where he touches on how small town pastors can grow their churches. So lean in, leaders, and let's get started. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the AVAIL podcast. I love this podcast because I get to talk to amazing people. Hey, everybody, my name is Virgil Sierra, lead pastor of Vertical Church, Iglesia Vertical in South Florida, where we are one church, two languages. And I'm your host for the AVAIL podcast, where we dig deep, talk about leadership with amazing leaders, with amazing pastors. And today will not disappoint. We are connecting with Pastor Johnny Moore from Cairo, Georgia. Pastor Johnny, we're so happy to have you on the AVAIL podcast. How are you feeling?
I am doing great. It is so good to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to visit with you and talk about just some of the greatest things, and that is seeing churches grow, lives change.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In a moment, we're going to talk about your new book, Homegrown, Growing What You Have, Where You Are. We're going to talk a little bit about your journey and your heart, especially for that small town pastor in the small towns that the Lord just bless you, encourage you, and put a message on your heart for everybody. Before we get to all that leadership conversation and church conversation, I would love for our AVAIL audience to lean in and get to know you a little bit. Tell us a little bit, who is Johnny Moore?
Okay, well, Johnny Moore, I am from Cairo, Georgia. Actually, I'm back in my hometown and have been back here for 30 years. But I grew up here, graduated from high school here. I met Jesus here. Worked in this community with my dad. He was at a glass company, worked in the glass business, and so worked in construction work and grew up here. And I don't know, something just began, after I got saved, something began to click inside of me that, I would really love to spend the rest of my life here. When I left Cairo, I didn't know if I ever would get to come back, but God did some amazing things and literally brought me back to my hometown. I love this place. It's a great place to call home.
I love it. I love that. I love when I get to speak to an author who has recently released a book. I get to do that a lot here on the AVAIL podcast. I want to talk about your book, Homegrown, Growing What You Have, Where You Are. Can you share with us a little bit about kind of the heart behind this book? What inspired you to write it, and why do you think this is a timely message?
Absolutely. Coming back to Cairo was something that I really felt like God had put in my heart to do. Being here and being from here, I love this town. I love the people. I really wanted to make a difference here. Mm-hmm. My life, when I was, especially in the early years, as a teenager, my life began to take a south turn and just began to go in a direction where I didn't need to go, and, ended up being caught up in the drugs, the alcohol, all the stuff that was going around and still is. However, it was during that time when I truly had an encounter with God. I was arrested, charged with felony charges for drug charges. And, it was during that time that I really gave my life to Christ, even though my mom and dad had raised me in church. Church was always been a part of my life. But that encounter just really it changed my whole life, changed my whole perspective. And, after that, I formed a singing group. We started traveling and doors began to open. We traveled around the country singing gospel music. And at that point, we sang in a church in Ocala, Florida on a Sunday night. And I saw the most beautiful young lady I'd ever seen in my life. And I thought, I think that God's going to help me and I'm going to marry that girl. And long story short, 3.5 years later, we both stood at the altar and said, I do. And it was a great moment. My wife, Diane, we've served God together, done some great things together. Obviously, we got married. We lived in Cairo, Georgia. We were there for about a year, and then her home church, the pastor in Ocala, offered us a job to come on staff there in Ocala. And so my heart for Cairo was really torn because, I mean, I very seldom when you leave a place do you ever get to go back. And so, I felt like God had put a dream in my heart to build something for God in this town. But it was like, it was, I don't know, maybe an Abraham, Isaac moment. And I had to lay it down. And so I really knew that we were supposed to move to Ocala. And so that's what we did. And it's like I buried that dream. Didn't know if I would ever get to see it become a reality. And maybe I was just mixed up and confused. I don't know. But I just felt like that I left that thing behind. After serving in Ocala for about 3 years or so, it's like all of a sudden I began to realize this thing was starting to grow. I began to have thoughts about Cairo and thoughts about home. And I don't know, it was like I realized all of a sudden that the dream was a seed. And when I planted it, I thought I buried it, which I did. But over a period of time, it began to grow. And so I had a conversation with my pastor and told him, this was something that was stirring on the inside of me. And, I was not ready to leave by any means. We loved Ocala. It was great. And so I was a youth pastor. And so I moved from youth pastor to become the director of ministries, where I oversaw all the ministries of the church. We went through the whole process of redefining the mission of the church. And what I realized later was this was an opportunity for me to practice what I was going to do when I came back home. And so 2 years later, in 1994, the Lord opened up a door.
Wow.
Me and Diane and our 2 boys, who were both babies, moved back to Cairo and planted Family Worship Center in July of 1994. And last month we celebrated 30 years here. And it's been amazing to see what God's done in Cairo, Georgia. I mean, it's been tough. It's been difficult. It's been pain and heartache and all of the things that go with it, but God's hand and God's favor and God's blessing has been upon it. And so God's helped us to grow a great church in a small town.
Yeah, I think I've heard, I've heard you mention that as I've been getting to know you here and also I've read it multiple times, connected to your book and kind of the heart behind it. You really do have a heart for the small town church and the small town pastor. There's a lot more than we think out there, huh?
Well, statistics tell us there's probably 85% of our churches are in rural and small towns, rural communities, small towns. And obviously the demographic shows populations in the big cities. But, God wants to build great churches in small towns.
Yeah.
And most of the emphasis, even on church growth, which I've been a student of church growth. And, I've learned so much from Dr. Chan, from Martine, from John Maxwell, so many of these people that I have followed and learned from. I've learned tremendous things. But what the problem is sometimes is translating that from the mindset of a large city to the small town. I remember I went to a conference one time in Atlanta. It was a John Maxwell conference called Challenge 1000. How do you grow your church to 1,000? Well, I wasn't running hardly 150 people. I just felt totally out of place when I got there. But I just felt like, there's sometimes you find yourself in places and think, only God could have gotten me in this room. And that's kind of how it was. And man, I got so pumped up, so excited. I'm going back to Cairo and we're going to grow this church to 1,000 overnight. And, I get back into Grady County, which is, again, Cairo, the county seat of Grady County. And I won't ever forget, I crossed that county line coming into town or coming into our community. And man, I'm so excited. And I come over this hill and there is a John Deere tractor with about a 20-row planter hooked to the back of it, covered the whole road. And I'm like, man, you have got to get out of the way. I have got to go to Cairo. I'm fixing to grow a church. You need to get out of my way. I am ready to do this. And it was like, I couldn't get around that tractor. There was no way to pass. And I don't know, just in my frustration, I felt like the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, this is what people drive where you live. It's like they don't drive Beamers and Jags here. They drive John Deere tractors. And it was like all of a sudden I came to the realization that this is who I am.
Yeah.
This is where I am. And if I'm going to grow this, then I've got to grow what I have right where I am.
Woo! That's good. That's good. Now, the interesting thing about your book, there's 12 chapters, but there's 5 main parts: calling,
Correct?
vision, structure, culture, and influence. I wish we had a long
Right.
time to talk about each one, but
Right?
maybe you could touch on a little bit from each or a couple of them. Which one of
Okay.
these stands out most to you?
Well, I think for me, obviously, the first part is the first part,
Yeah.
and that is the section of calling.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, most people that are trying to do a work for God feel like that God has called them.
Right.
I mean, they feel like they have this calling of God on their life. Well, I also feel like, and I've learned it through just my experience, is that I believe not only do you have to know that you're called by God, but I believe you have to know that I've been called by God to this place. Now, I believe that, if you got a call of God on your life, you could probably go most anywhere and do something great for God.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that there's only one place in the whole world that I could ever go and do
Right.
something for God. But I believe that if I'm going to do something for God in Cairo, Georgia, and that's where my heart is, and that's where my life is, then I feel like that I need to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I have been called by God to this place.
That's good.
Because if I don't know that, then I'll always be looking for another place.
Mm.
I mean, I've been here for 30 years, and the reason because I feel like God has called me to this place.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had opportunities to go other places, but I just had this calling on my life that, I mean, I don't mean this in any prideful way, but this is my town.
Yeah.
This is where God has called me, and this is where I'm going to serve right here. So I think the calling, and a lot of times pastors struggle with the place. And I don't know, maybe it's sometimes because they feel like they put themselves there, or an overseer put themselves there, or a church voted on them, and so that's how they know they're supposed to be there. And so they know it because of somebody else, but they don't know it on the inside. And so when other opportunities arise, it's too easy to leave. But if you know God's called me here, then I'm not looking for any other place to go. So I think calling is very important. But another thing that I'm just extremely passionate about is the whole area of vision. In this book, I talk about vision in 3 parts. I believe vision is like looking at the picture on the box of a puzzle. I mean, when you look at that big, there's 3,000 piece puzzle. Well, you've got the cover of the box, and it shows you a picture of what it's supposed to look like. Okay, that's vision. That's a big picture.
Yep.
But I think that vision has to be broken down into other parts. And so when in this book I talk about it, is that I had a picture of what I felt like God wanted to do in Cairo. But for it to happen, number one, I had to discover what is the mission of this church.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to teach my people that we are a church on a mission. That, we're not just here to have church on Sunday.
Right.
That's part of it. But I wanted this church to know what the mission of this church is, who we are, why do we exist. And so in the book, I break down how we took our church through the whole process of defining our mission. What is God going to hold us accountable for? Who are we as a church, and why are we here? And that's been a huge factor for me. And I think a lot of times churches aren't as effective as they can be because they don't really know who they are and why they exist. I mean, it's like somebody said, it's like they don't know who their daddy is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what I mean by that is that they don't know who I am and why I exist. So you know what they do? They go through the motions every week, and they just have church and do the same thing, just different hymn, same routine over and over and over. And so mission is extremely important. And when you look at that big picture of the vision, it breaks down into 3 parts: mission, And then I call the second part strategic vision. In other words, if I'm going to put this puzzle together, how am I going to put it together? Am I going to start by putting the edges around
Right.
and start on a corner? Vision, the strategic vision basically says, so what are we going to do today? I mean, what are we doing? Mission is who we are and why we exist. But vision says, okay, so what's our plan? What are we going to do to be that? And then the third part is core values. I'm a believer in core values because the reason that things look and appear and function like they do is because of what's in the core. You take an apple and cut the apple in two. In the middle of the apple, there's a core. And if you dig inside that core, you'll find that in the core, there's a seed. The core value has to do with why do we do this? And too many churches aren't effective because they don't know why they're doing it. I mean, if I know why I am trying to reach people, then it don't matter who people are or what color they are, where they came from, where they were last night,
Right.
what they've been through. The why is because these people matter to God. That's my core value. People matter to God. And so anyway, I talk about all that in the book and the importance of most churches don't take the time to go through that, especially in a small town. If you go to a larger church and you see in a larger city, I promise you they're going to have these things broken down in pieces. They're going to know their mission. They're going to know what their vision is, and they're going to know why they're doing it. But in a small town, I don't know, we just wing it. But I believe our growth has come because of beginning to implement these things years ago. I mean, and you've got the other parts of the book as well, and I wish we had time to talk about all of it. But.
Yeah, I want to mention one more because I like the title and it intrigues me. Under the section structure, the third section, there's a chapter, chapter 7. What grows tall must grow wide. Can you just tell us what that means?
Absolutely. In South Georgia where I live, we have a saying that says anything that grows overnight is a weed. Things don't grow overnight. But if something grows overnight, you have to be careful with it because it probably won't last long. I mean, you can go cut the grass and the grass looks beautiful like a golf course. And you go out there the next morning and there's a big tall weed sticking up and it's like, what happened? Where did that come from? I mean, how could I miss that? Well, you didn't miss it. It just grew up overnight. But when the heat hits that weed, it may have grown tall, but it doesn't have any depth and any width to it. And so when the pressure comes, when the heat arrives, it will not stand. And in the book, I talk about even a personal experience that we had, that there was a time in our church when our church was, man, we thrived on the fact that, man, we were a fast-growing church. Man, we were growing fast. The only problem is that we grew fast, but, buddy, I'm telling you, when the wind hit us and the storms hit us, man, we fell just about as fast as we grew. And I began to realize, there's got to be some depth in here. We've got to have width to where we can't just grow tall. We've got to grow wide so that when the storms come, we can balance this thing out and stand in the midst of it.
Yeah.
And we talk about in the book how we did that. One of the things I want to say about the book is that it's not a book about what. In other words, it's not just full of what we did. I've been and sat and listened to pastors many times, and they've been successful, and I've wanted to learn from them, and I have. But so many times they tell me what they did. And I leave and I'm thinking, man, that was awesome. But I leave and think, you know what? They told me what they did, but they didn't tell me how they did it. So this book talks about this is how we did it. Obviously, we had God's help.
Yeah.
But these are things, practical, strategical things that we did that I believe any church in a small town can begin to implement and will begin to see some lasting growth.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let's suppose for a moment, Pastor Johnny, that we had an auditorium with about 100 small town pastors, and
Right.
and you have an opportunity right now to just encourage them, just to bring a word that's going to encourage them. And obviously, you probably would give them your book. But let's
That's
say,
right.
actually, let me make it even more reflective. I want to make it a personal reflective question for you, Pastor Johnny. If
Okay.
if you could go to the Cairo, Georgia High School auditorium, the year that you were going to plant the church, the year that
Right.
you haven't started yet, but you're about to plant Family Worship Center in Cairo, Georgia, and you had an opportunity for an hour to give some tips and some advice to yourself and any other, small town pastors that were going to plant and start a church. What are some of the things that you would talk about, share, or advice you would give?
Well, I think the first thing that I would say to them is that God has a plan and a purpose for your life.
Mm-hmm.
That no matter where you've been, I mean, if you look at my life, I've had a great life. I mean, I am thankful for my life, but it hasn't been easy. It's like Martine says sometimes, it's simple, but it's not easy.
Uh-huh.
I mean, and what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter what your past looks like, because God never called us to live in the past. I mean, we have to live in the present, but we have to have a vision for the future. And your past does not have to determine where you're going from this point. I mean, I'm a prime example of that.
Yep.
So it doesn't matter who you are. I believe that if you know that you're called by God, and you have fallen in love with a city, with a town, with a place, I believe that you can do something great right there where you are. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are. I believe that God's got a plan, and I'm not just talking about some pie in the sky, just everything's happy, everything's good. No, it's tough, it's difficult, but you can do something great, and you can accomplish something great and awesome for the kingdom of God in a small town. I mean, I believe the greatest churches in small towns have yet to be built.
That's right.
I believe there are people in small towns that really want to see things happen. Okay, for instance, a lot of times kids graduate from high school, they go to college, and many times they don't ever come home until they get older and they get their own kids. And then they think, I mean, I don't want to live in this busy city. This is crazy up here. I'm ready to go back home. Well, if they're in a big city, many times they got connected to a church that's maybe a large church, and a very contemporary church, and then they go back to their home, and there's not anything they can find like where they've been. And so in many cases, they stop going. I'm just telling you, God wants us to build great churches in small towns. And so if I was talking to a group of pastors, I would tell them that you can do this.
Yeah.
And for me, I would say that it starts, number one, with redefining the mission of your church. You have to know who we are and why we are here. I mean, because culture, especially in small towns, the culture is a traditional mindset. The church culture, people that have been raised in church, this is how we do it, it's how we've always done it. And what I'm trying to say is that many times the church does not know who they are and why they exist. They don't know their mission. When I begin to teach our church and share from the Word, and we begin to define this mission, it began to evolve from this conference that we had for that specific purpose. I'm standing at the front and I'm watching lights come on in the people's minds and in their eyes, because they have never thought about it like that at all. It changed the whole mindset of our church. So yeah, I mean, I love talking about mission, and I love teaching pastors how to redefine their mission. It changes everything.
Yeah, it really does. And I like what you said about also reminding and telling them, hey, your past doesn't have to limit you. Don't be stuck maybe in mistakes, especially from the past. I think you're a living testimony to that, right?
That's absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, there's an article that's coming out in an upcoming issue of AVAIL, and it's called "Inside Creating an Irritable Church
Right?
Culture." Can you share a little bit about that? You've already been touching on it, I think, but can you share a little bit about the heart behind this article, and then maybe even touch on some of the small town mindsets that might hinder, the objective of why a church is
Sure.
there?
Well, every church has culture, whether they realize it or not. I mean, all you have to do is pull up in the parking lot. You can look around at the property. You can walk in the door of the church. You can see culture on the wall. You can see culture, and everywhere you look, it's there. And many times people don't realize that their culture is repelling to new people.
Wow.
It's not repelling to them because they've always been there. But culture is extremely important because I believe culture will either draw people or it will repel people. And I'm not talking about compromise of the gospel. I mean, I'm not talking about compromising the message at all. But many times in small towns, we deal with what is called the church culture. I mean, the church is the whole culture of the church is for people that have been in church.
Yeah.
And so we talk about things. We have a language that we speak because we can speak it because we've been in church all our life. But if some new person that walks in, they have no idea what we're talking about.
Right.
They don't understand the language. And you also, in small towns, many times you deal with what I call the mom and pop mindset. I mean, it's like the mom and pop grocery store.
Yep.
We've always ran it. It's been ours. We've owned it. Somebody said, well, can you get some of this? Nope, we don't stock that. We don't get that. We sell this. Again, we're here to share Jesus, but, we're not interested in trying to connect with lost people. We're trying to connect with church people. And so that's why churches bounce around. But it's the culture. That's why people bounce around many times from one church to the next. It's amazing how they can leave one church because they get disgruntled, go to the next church and try to make that church like the one they just left. It's culture. And then, you've got, the whole color culture, as I call it. I mean, you've got white churches and you got black churches and you got Hispanic churches and you got Asian churches. And so all of that is culture. When you start talking about, a multicultural church or a multi-ethnic church, it's like people don't understand how that's supposed to be. But my mindset is that if I go to the elementary school here in Cairo, Georgia, and I park out by the road and look at the playground at recess, I see a picture of Grady County. I see a picture of Cairo, Georgia. All these different kids, they're running around, they're having a great time, they're playing together. But when you go to a church, many times in small towns, what you don't see a picture of that. We wanted to develop a culture where when you come into our church, you see what Cairo, Georgia looks like.
Right.
All of that is culture. And you got the whole cliquish culture of, bottom line is that who are these people? They're not from here. We've been raised here. Who are these new people coming in here? They're trying to come in here and change us. It's that whole cliquish culture. That's the Joneses church, and that's the Miller's church over there, and that's the Moore's church over here. It's that whole cliquish thing. But what we have tried to develop at Family Worship Center is what we call a Christ-like culture. Because a Christ-like culture, it's filled with acceptance. It doesn't matter who you are, don't matter where you were last night. We want you to be here today. We believe the gospel has the power to transform your life. And so, we'll accept you. We'll love you. We'll help you. That's a Christ-like culture. It's a culture that's filled with things like a challenge. When you go Christ would challenge the people. He loved them where they were, but he didn't leave them where they were. He moved them to a whole new place. And he challenged them to grow. He challenged them to learn. So when you start, and again, I talk about all that in the book, but the whole Christ-like culture, if we begin to develop a Christ-like culture, I'm just telling you, people will be attracted to the church because Jesus always had a crowd. People were always attracted to him.
Mm-hmm.
So if we create a Christ-like culture, we will begin to see our church grow. So I talk about how to do that, which I will tell you, one of the best ways to do it, in my opinion, is through preaching and teaching.
Yeah.
I believe preaching and teaching are the two greatest tools that we have as pastors. And instead of just standing up and trying to introduce something new, take 3 months and preach about it. Teach about it.
Yeah.
Help people see, help take them to a place where they're open and they begin to see what could happen before you just throw something out there and they're like, nope, we're not doing that. Not going to have that. Well, it's because the people are not prepared. They're only thinking about themselves, not the harvest.
Mm-hmm. I love this. I think Pastor Johnny, it's helpful for pastors and leaders to get their hands on resources. I think it makes all the difference. And speaking of that, I would love for you to help people know where can they go to get a hold of your book, Homegrown. I think you have a physical copy there, and for those who are watching the video.
I do.
Yeah, I have it.
Yeah.
I have it. I was able to see some of the book digitally, but I'm excited to get it in my hands soon. Where can people go to get the book and any other resources connected to it?
Okay. You can go to our website. We have a website, homegrownpastor.com. Homegrownpastor.com. And on that website, obviously, we have our book. The book also has a study guide that goes with it. Matter of fact, we are, in September, we are starting homegrown small groups, and we're going to take our whole church through the book by virtue of the study guide.
Wow.
And lead small groups because we have a lot of new people that have been at our church. And so we want to take them through the whole process and let them, they love the church. We want them to see why we are like we are. So we're going to take them through the book. So homegrownpastor.com, you can go there. And also, we also have some other resources, teaching and preaching materials, stewardship materials, like we have taught. Every year I preach stewardship. And I remember when I was a young pastor, one of the things I had a hard time knowing how to do is how do you talk about money? How do I preach about money to my church? But obviously you got to have money. And so I quit trying to preach about money and start preaching about stewardship. And so we've got stewardship material. As a pastor that I coach, and he sent me an email last week. He probably runs 50 people in his church right now. But he said I preached one of your series on stewardship, and he said when I got to the end of the series, he sent this to me on Sunday. He said this morning I finished the series, and he said I handed out commitment cards like you said and had people sign them. I had 11 new people that made a commitment and signed a card to begin to be a first-time tither.
Wow.
In a church of 50, can you imagine what can happen if 11 new people start tithing?
Yep.
So anyway, he learned that from the resources that we have. But at homegrownpastor.com, and also have a Facebook page, Instagram, and you can find it at Homegrown Pastor. You can go there, and you can get the book, you can get the study guide, you can buy it. But there's a whole bundle where you can get the book, the study guide, the audio book. You can get a master class, which the master class should be released even in the next week or so. So it'll be available where you can use the 10-minute videos to go with the study guide. And but we have lots of resources there. And that's, one of the things we want to do is put resources in pastors' hands to help them do what they feel like God's called them to do.
Yeah, that's good. Everybody, you heard that? Homegrownpastor.com. You can access and purchase the book. I would suggest getting the bundle where you get the book, the study guide, the masterclass videos access. I love this, Pastor Johnny. It's exciting to see resources that help people. Speaking of resources, our AVAIL Journal, it comes out quarterly where we have amazing articles like the article that you have submitted that's in one of our AVAIL Journals. Do you agree that having a resource like AVAIL Journal is helpful for pastors?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember that's how I had heard Dr. Chan speak on many occasions, but when I remember when the Veil came out, I mean, number one, I thought that is one of the best looking magazines I have ever seen.
Yeah.
I've got to be a part of that. And man, then I start reading these articles, and it's just loaded. It is loaded with tremendous material for leadership, and helped me get connected to people like Martin, who
Yeah.
published my book. So it's
Yep.
a great resource. It's one of my favorites.
Yes, yes, yes. If you have not done so, everybody, you can get a free trial subscription on us by going to availjournal.com. Availjournal.com. Great magazine with great contents, amazing articles by amazing leaders, just like Pastor Johnny Moore, who has an article in one of our Avail magazines. As we kind of wrap things up, Pastor Johnny, what's a final thought or encouragement you want to leave on everybody's hearts?
Well, I would like to say to everyone that's listening today that the dream, the vision that God's put in your heart, it usually takes longer than what you think. For me, I mean, I went through some tough times when I moved to Cairo. I really thought that this thing was going to take off and it was going to grow overnight, as I've already mentioned. But I was met with obstacles. I was met with things that realized that this is not going to happen as fast as I thought that it would. But I'm here 30 years later, and when I look back and I see what God has done, I just get broken up and I cry in a heartbeat when I think about it, because it's happened. It's like my friend John Maxwell says, it's not something that happens. It happens daily, not in a day.
Right.
And that's the way it's been. We've stayed at it. We've stayed at it. God's helped us here in this town. We have 31 senior adult houses that we've built that belong to Family Worship Center.
Wow.
And they're occupied. I mean, it's ways that we have now begun to have influence, which we talk about it in the book. But it did not come overnight. Influence didn't happen overnight. So I want to say to every person, every pastor, look, don't get discouraged because it didn't happen overnight. Stay with it. Keep on keeping on. I'm a living testimony that if God can do it for us in Cairo, Georgia, he can do it for you right where you are as well.
That's a great word, everybody. That's a great, great word. Pastor Johnny, on behalf of Dr. Sam Chand, Martijn van Tilborg, our whole Avail team, we just want to say thank you for writing this book. We honor you. We bless you for your leadership, and we're thankful to have your voice in our Avail audience.
Thank you so much. I'm blessed to be a part of it. I have truly been blessed.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Everybody, I hope you've been encouraged. What a great conversation with Pastor Johnny Moore. Remember, his new book, Homegrown, Growing What You Have, Where You Are. Make sure you tap into that book, and I suggest upgrading to the Masterclass bundle. Go to homegrownpastor.com, where you can buy the book, the study guide, access the Masterclass videos. It's going to help you. As always, we bring the best to you here on the Avail Podcast. On behalf of Avail, my name is Virgil Sierra, lead pastor of Vertical Church Iglesia Vertical, and I'm your host here on the Avail Podcast, where we dig deep and talk about this art that we call leadership. So we'll catch you next time right here on the Avail Podcast. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Avail Podcast. For more leadership resources, check us out at theartofleadership.com. And make sure to claim your free trial subscription of the AVAIL Journal at availjournal.com. As always, I'm your Avail Podcast host, Virgil Sierra. Muchas gracias. Thank you for connecting with us to learn the art of leadership here at the AVAIL Podcast.